sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
All right, so are you ready to make some smart bets this wild card weekend? We dove deep into some expert predictions, and trust me, some of these are really interesting.
It's more than just picking winners. It's about understanding the strategy, like why are these experts making these bets?
Exactly. So we're going to be focusing on two key matchups today. We're looking at the Chargers versus Texans, and then we're going to go to the Steelers versus the Ravens.
And we'll be able to give you that aha moment, where you go, oh, now I see why they're making these predictions.
Okay, so let's kick things off down in Houston. We've got the Chargers going up against the Texans, and one prediction that really caught my eye was the under on 42.5 total points. Now, I know on the surface you might be thinking, wait, but the Chargers have been putting up some serious points lately.
That's true, but they're going up against this Chargers defense, which has been really tough.
Yeah.
I mean, they've allowed the fewest points in the league this season.
And the Texans haven't really faced a defense like this all season long.
Right, so you can't just look at their past performance and how they've done against, maybe some weaker opponents. This Chargers defense is a whole different beast.
Okay, so maybe the Chargers offense won't be quite as explosive as we've seen recently, but they have been on a roll, right? I mean, they've scored over 34 points in their last 3 games.
True, but if you look back a little further than that, before that streak, they were averaging just 17 points a game. And here's what gets really interesting. Houston's defense has a really strong pass rush.
Okay, and just for our listeners who may not be total football gurus, the pass rush is basically how quickly and how effectively the defense can get to the quarterback to disrupt the play.
Exactly, and if the Texans can really put pressure on that Chargers quarterback, it'll probably force them to rely more on their running game, which would slow things down a bit, lead to a more conservative style of offense.
So fewer of those quick scores, longer drives, and ultimately fewer scoring opportunities for both teams.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It all ties back to that under 42.5 prediction. Now, another one that jumped out at me, Ka'imi Fairbairn, the Texans kicker, over 7.5 points.
So we're not just betting on who wins the game, but how many points the kicker scores? Okay, I like it. This is interesting.
This one hinges on the Texans' offensive, tendencies. They haven't been great at scoring touchdowns once they get inside that opponent's 20-yard line, what they call the red zone.
So they struggle to punch it in even when they're close.
Right. They're only converting about 49.1% of their red zone trips into touchdowns. And get this, they're going up against the Chargers, who have the #1 ranked red zone defense.
That's rough. So even if the Texans can move the ball well, they might stall out near the goal line, leading to more field goal attempts for Fairbairn.
Yeah, and that's the bet. But there's a slight wrinkle. Fairbairn himself has been in a bit of a scoring slump recently.
So is relying on him a risky move then?
Well, before that dip, he was incredibly consistent. Like, he scored 8 or more points in 9 out of 10 games. So it's tough to say.
Okay, so we got a recent dip versus long-term consistency. Definitely something to think about. All right, let's head over to Pittsburgh now, where the Steelers are taking on the Ravens. And this matchup has a lot of focus on Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and understanding this offensive shift that the Ravens have gone through is really key here. There's still a run-first team, but their main weapon has changed.
Right. It's no longer Lamar Jackson leading the charge as the primary rusher. Now it's Derrick Henry.
And that changes the whole game. This season, the Ravens are undefeated when Henry rushes for over 100 yards. I mean, that's got to tell you something, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty good indicator. And it's not like this happened just once or twice. We're talking 9 games this season, including their last 3. So clearly, when Henry has a big day, the Ravens are tough to beat.
Exactly, which is why so many of these predictions for this game revolve around Henry's performance.
So let's get specific. What kind of bets are we looking at here?
So, a couple of different options, but they all kind of hinge on Derrick Henry's rushing yards and attempts. We're looking at over 20.5 rushing attempts, over 98.5 rushing yards.
Okay, so those seem like, fairly reasonable bets based on what we were just talking about. I'm guessing there are some riskier options too, though, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, for those who are, feeling a little bit more bold, there are bets for Henry going over 110 rushing yards and even 130 rushing yards. The odds on those are pretty enticing.
Okay, all right, so let's break it all down, starting with that over 20.5 rushing attempts. What's the logic behind that one being such a popular bet?
Well, it basically boils down to this. The Ravens AGVE to establish the run. They have to do it to control the tempo of the game and to keep Lamar Jackson from being under constant pressure from that Steelers defense.
Makes sense. The Steelers are known for their tough defense, especially against quarterbacks who can run, like Lamar Jackson.
Exactly. And so the more carries Henry gets, the less pressure there is on Jackson, and the better the Ravens' chances of winning. And if we look back at Henry's performance in those 9 games where he went over 100 rushing yards, well, he had 23 carries or more in all but one of those games. So 20.5 attempts seems pretty achievable.
Okay, so maybe that's the safer bet, but then there's also that bet on Henry having 23 or more rushing attempts, right? And I'm guessing the odds are better on that one.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But it is a little bit riskier. It's based on, the Ravens are really going to lean heavily into the run against the Steelers, even if they're facing some, resistance early on.
So you're thinking if you're feeling bold and you really believe that the Ravens are going to stick to that identity, that 23-plus carry bet might be worth it.
Exactly. And then when it comes to rushing yards, over 98.5 is probably, the safer option.
But then you've got those 110-plus and 130-plus yard bets, which are where things get really interesting, right?
Yeah, and those are actually not as crazy as they sound. Henry's got a history of putting up those big numbers, especially when he gets a lot of carries. Like in games where he had 24 carries or more, he averaged over 132 yards.
Wow. Okay, so the thinking is if the Ravens really feed Henry the ball, those big yardage totals are definitely within reach. But that's a big if, isn't it?
Oh, it definitely is. And that's where your own analysis comes in, right?
Yeah.
How do you see that Steelers defense matching up against Henry? Do you think they can contain him, or will he, run wild?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? The Steelers, they've got a reputation for being tough against the run, but Henry, the guy's a tank.
Yeah, and we're talking playoff football here, right? Yeah. So the intensity's it's another level.
Yeah, everyone's bringing their A game.
So the stakes are even higher.
Exactly. So this kind of brings us to a question for you. How much do you trust the Ravens to really unleash Henry in this matchup? Like, are they going to give him the ball enough to hit those big numbers?
That's the gamble, right?
Yeah.
Will they stick to that run-first game plan, even if the Steelers, put up a fight? Or are they going to panic and abandon it too early?
That's a great point. Like, it's easy to sit here and say, oh, just feed Henry the ball. But what if the Steelers adjust their defense, like specifically to shut him down?
Exactly. And that's why those higher yardage bets, they carry more risk, right? You're not just betting on Henry's ability. You're kind of betting on the Ravens coaching staff, and are they really going to commit to the run?
Okay, so we've really unpacked a lot here. We've looked at the predictions, we've talked about the logic behind them, and some of those key factors to consider. Now, I'm curious, what's really standing out to you in all of this? What are you finding most fascinating about these predictions?
Well, what's fascinating to me is, how these predictions, they go beyond just the simple stats, right? It's not just looking at how many yards a player averages or how many points a team scores. You got to understand, the nuances of their game plan, their coaching philosophy, even their opponent's tendencies.
Almost like a chess match, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like anticipating the moves and counter moves. You almost got to think like a coach.
Yeah, you're in the mind of the coach.
Exactly. And that's what makes betting on the NFL playoffs so exciting. Right? It's not just about luck. It's about strategy, analysis. It's informed decision-making.
So speaking of strategy, I kind of want to circle back to the Chargers and Texans game for a minute. We talked a lot about that under 42.5 bet and, Sarah Burns kicking. But what about the Chargers offense as a whole?
Yeah, that's an interesting angle, right? Because they've been kind of unpredictable this season, haven't they? Those 3 games with over 34 points were impressive. But can they replicate that against this Texans defense?
And even during that hot streak, their passing game was really the primary driver of their success. But now they're facing this Texans defense that's known for its pass rush, which could be a problem.
It could. If the Texans can really disrupt that Chargers passing game, it might force them to become more one-dimensional,
right?
Relying a lot more on the run.
Which would play right into that under 42.5 prediction, right? Yeah. Like a slower, grinded-out style of offense from the Chargers would definitely help to keep that score down.
Exactly. It all connects. And that's what makes this type of analysis so interesting. You got to consider all the different angles and how they might influence each other. It's like piecing together this puzzle.
Yeah, or like a detective story.
Yeah.
You're gathering these clues. You're trying to predict how it all plays out in the end.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to do here on the Deep Dive, right? Yeah. We don't just give you the answers. We give you the tools and the knowledge so you can make your own informed decisions.
Exactly. So as you're considering those bets this weekend, Think about everything we've discussed, the trends, the matchups, the strategies. Don't just blindly follow the crowd. Make your bets with confidence, knowing you've done your homework.
And remember, sports are unpredictable, right? Upsets happen, players have good days, bad days. The key is to bet responsibly and have fun with it.
Absolutely. Great advice. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. We spent a lot of time, breaking down those individual player performances, especially with Derrick Henry. But what about the coaches? Like, how much of an impact do you think their decisions could have in these games?
Oh, coaching. That's, it's often the X factor, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in the stats and everything. But ultimately, it's the coaches who are calling the plays and really setting the tone for the whole team.
For sure. So, with the Chargers, how will their coach adjust if that passing game is really struggling against that Texans pass rush? Are they going to be stubborn and just stick to the original game plan? Or will they get creative and find other ways to, move the ball down the field?
Yeah, and then with the Ravens, how committed are they going to be to the run, even if it's not working right away? Will they really put their faith in Henry and just trust him to, to break through? Or will they be tempted to abandon the run and try to win it through the air?
Right. So these are the kind of questions you really need to ask yourself when you're making those bets. It's not just looking at the players. It's almost like you gotta get inside the minds of the coaches and anticipate their decisions.
It's like four-dimensional chess.
Yeah.
You got to think several moves ahead and consider all the different scenarios.
Yeah. And you know what? We can't forget about the emotional side of things either, right? I mean, playoffs are high pressure.
Absolutely.
Who's going to be hungrier?
Yeah.
Which team can handle that pressure better, and avoid making those costly mistakes? Those factors are harder to quantify, but they can definitely swing a game.
Oh, for sure.
And, one more thing. We can't forget about good old Mother Nature, right? What happens if the weather takes a turn for the worse?
Oh, the weather. That's right, yeah. You get a rainy, windy day, and it can completely change the game.
Slippery ball, poor visibility, suddenly those high-powered passing offenses not looking so great. And on the other hand, a strong running game could become even more valuable.
Exactly. The weather's a wild card.
Big time.
So yeah, when you're finalizing your bets this weekend, don't just look at the stats. Consider the coaches, the mental game. Even check that weather forecast.
It's about getting that edge, that extra bit of insight that can help you make a smarter bet. And that's what the deep dive is all about.
We want to equip you with, the knowledge, the different perspectives, so you can make those informed decisions.
So what does all this mean for you? It means you're armed with some serious insights heading into Wild Card Weekend. You've got the predictions, you understand the logic behind them, and you've considered all the angles. So now it's time to, put that knowledge to good use.
Bet responsibly, have fun, and enjoy the games.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.